I had a great conversation with my friend Steve Carr today about boys and education. How do we reach our boys? How do we teach our boys? Are there different strategies that's needed to be able to effectively engage with boys specifically in our educational system? Is that being done? Can it be done? Steve is an expert on this and drops a load of knowledge bombs in there. So have a listen. As always, let us know what you think in the comments. And if you like what you see, subscribe and like. The only thing worse than a boy who hates you, a boy that loves you. Marcus Zuzak.
We are live in the Magnificent Man Project Facebook group. I'm Laurence Johns. It's Thursday. That must mean it is Thursday for knowledge. And today I am very excited and looking forward to this session because I am here with one of my old and dear friends, Steve Carr, who, as well as that fantastic honor of being one of my dear friends, is also a very interesting and innovative character in the discussion around education and around teaching and the role of teaching. So I invited Steve on here today to talk about, and we were just having a talk about this in the sort of pre-warm-up bit, a massive subject around can boys be boys? You know, and what we mean by that is how can boys really operate in the current education system? Is it set up to help them? Is it set up in a healthy way for them? With the roles of masculinity and gender sort of changing so much, how is that sort of being looked at within the school system? So with no further ado, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Steve. I'm going to hand over to you, Steve, because you'll do a much better job. You're much more eloquent than I am, and you'll do a much better job at explaining exactly what it is that you do for anyone who's watching now. So over to you, Steve.
Okay, thanks, mate. Real pleasure to be here. I think I was saying to Laurence, I should have dressed more like a teacher. I look a bit more like a bouncer. But anyway, that aside, yeah, so what I do, I've started a company called A Mind to Teach. So A Mind to Teach really is all about the helping teachers with the emotional kind of aspect of teaching and learning. So, you know, a teacher really, or even though you go into a classroom to teach a subject, English, maths, whatever it might be, really, from my own experience of kind of 15 years in the classroom, what you're really doing is creating a safe space for learning to happen. That's really the role of a teacher. That's the primary function, creating a place where people feel safe enough to take the risk, to walk towards the unknown. The classroom is full of unknowns. You know, the next thing that you learn may be something that's out of your grasp. What will you do with that sense of it being unknown? Who will you blame if you can't get it? Will you throw that blame on the teacher? Lots of kids often do, particularly in comprehensive education, where you have people from lots of different backgrounds, economic backgrounds. So really my company, A Mind to Teach, is really all around creating emotional safety in the classroom. How can we help teachers understand that? How can we help them sort of show up in such a way as to be open to the fact that they're encouraging vulnerability in children and hold that space in such a way as to make learning exciting and interesting? So that's really their job, and that's what I share with teachers, and that's the work that I'm doing.
Great. So thank you for coming on. Thank you for coming and doing this talk on the Magnificent Man Project group. Yep. If you're watching this on YouTube, by the way, then if you want to come onto Facebook and join the Magnificent Man Project group, then you can see these recordings live. And that also means that you can get involved in the Q&A through the comments section on the Facebook group. If you're watching, obviously, that means if you're watching it on the Facebook group, please get involved in the comments section. Steve, the reason that I think this is really interesting for the people who are a member of this group or watching it on the YouTube channel is that the basis of what the Magnificent Man Project is it's a place where people can share information freely around what we can do to benefit our own lives as men in terms of our well-being, and what we can do to kind of support each other and challenge each other on moving that out a little bit, and being able to kind of create a better world for everyone, really, not wanting to sound too lofty, but also wanting to sound too lofty. And clearly kind of the education of the boys is kind of central to that. It's like, how are we going to have happy and adjusted adult men? Well, clearly we need to build and create an environment where we nurture healthy, boys who are going to grow up into connected men that can challenge and be challenged and can contribute and can celebrate and can make the world that we want and that they want. Do you think that the current system does that? Do you think boys are served well by the education system?
Well, we said, didn't we, at the beginning, it's a massive, massive question. But I suppose I can only, few things I'm drawing on, really. One is, my own experience, my son's experience. I've got an 18-year-old son who's been through the state system. I know, Laurence, I've had some experience of your experience of education, and I know that you also have a son. So it's a subject close to my heart. I mean, I suppose the other area is thinking about how boys show up in classrooms, and how that is often, how teachers often kind of respond to boys and boys' behaviour in the room, and how different that is to girls. So, that's two things, really, two areas, two places where we can draw our sort of understanding from. I mean, it's interesting for me because my son, Tom, who is now 18, went through a school system which really honoured in boys the idea of kind of sport and notions of, a boy does sport, a boy is a gamer, a boy is and gave these very kind of clear labels to boys, which Tom never really fitted. So he struggled to not just, he struggled to sort of find his identity as a boy. And I think we need to be careful when we say, can boys be boys, that we don't actually sort of label all boys as the same. It's a big mistake, particularly on this platform, would be to go, what we're talking about is this kind of stereotypical
boys are boys, and boys like this.
Yeah, boys are boys and boys are like this is part of the kind of nonsense that we're trying to, in a way, in my view, kind of deal with. We need to look at it in a much more complex way. Yeah. And for Tom, particularly, what he needed, that he struggled to get in school, was an understanding that he needed to be supported in being the boy that he wanted to be, that he needed to be in that environment. And that was a boy who was actually a bit more gentle, a bit softer, a bit more kind of open and vulnerable. And actually that made it quite difficult for him, because he was bullied. And I think the schools struggled in a way to understand this sort of different kind of boy. Yeah. And I think we need to be really careful that we don't, particularly as people who are interested in men and men's development, do that with boys. So let's be careful of that.
Yeah.
The other thing, the other area to draw on, though, is what happens in classrooms. I was a teacher for 15 years. I'm going back to the classroom in September, so I've got a lot of experience of teaching boys and girls, and I've done some research around it. And the thing around the way boys, if we are going to stereotype, which we need to some extent, and there's loads of exceptions to this, and my son is one of them, often in classrooms, boys are quite sort of different in the way they respond to things. They can be more restless. They can be more kind of aggressive in the way that when they don't know something, they're less complex in the way they communicate that. So if you're a teacher in a classroom and you're dealing with boys and girls, often the way teachers respond to boys in a room is that they actually respond to them as though the teacher themselves are kind of on the back foot, you know. And actually, research shows that when you're dealing with boys in a classroom, teachers often talk to boys from a distance, whereas they'll talk to girls close up. So if you talk to boys from a distance, what you're doing is you're sort of putting that boy in a position whereby you're saying to him, not consciously, but you're saying to that boy, well, look, there's something about you that I'm fearful of getting close to and moving towards. So we'll have this conversation from the front of the class. So that boy's behavior then becomes difficult, not only for that teacher, but for that boy, because there's something in that exchange that says to that kid, what is it about me that makes it difficult for this teacher to kind of come close?
That's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because I think, we know each other through the Mankind Project, and I know you don't mind me kind of talking about that here, and a lot of people I get on in this group are. And one of the things that's interesting about that is that what I've come across through that work is a lot of a lot of isolation in men. Like men thinking, actually, I kind of grew up thinking I was alone in the world. Like there's just me, and I'm different to everyone else, and I don't feel like I'm clearly not a woman. But I don't feel like this model, like we're talking about how it's damaging to have a model of what men and boys should be, but I don't feel like them either. So what am I? I'm sort of different. I'm unique, and unique means isolated as well as it means special. And what I'm hearing from what you're saying is that, like, that's a really interesting thing, because we're also saying that there, aren't we? We're saying there's a distance from you. There's a distance from you that I keep. And I find that really interesting in boys and young men, because I think that the story that young men get told, certainly I'll use it as me, a story that I got told about myself as a young man growing up in East London in the 80s and 90s. It was kind of a rough area then. It was a rough school. The message that I got loud and clear was that everyone thought we were dangerous. We were dangerous. There was no doubt about it. Teachers were afraid of us. Anyone in authority was kind of, what are these boys going to do? And I think that's really deeply ingrained. I think even down to the word boisterous. Like, boisterous it sounds like monstrous in a way. It sounds like, it means like a boy, but it's like, it's not. Boisterous is definitely not seen as like a good thing to be. It's seen as a sort of a damaging thing to be. And I think also that thing of I'm somehow dangerous and different than is intoxicating to boys and young men as they're growing up. It's the first bit of power that we get, in a way, is like, especially when we group up, and I think that was one of the other things that I learned from school anyway. It was like, here in this situation, in this school, I can be on my own and vulnerable, or I can be in a group of other dangerous young boys, and then we're safe. We're different from everyone else, but we're safe. And do you think there's a lot that plays a part of that?
Yeah, no, definitely. And there's other research that says that actually one of the things, the way that boys and girls kind of come together, is that often boys will meet in larger groups. They'll kind of, there won't be like, and let me just keep saying there are exceptions to this, and my son is one of them, but the research points to the idea that actually when boys meet, they meet in larger kind of groups, they take up more space, they make more noise. So all of these things mean that they're much more kind of visible in a way. And that makes them also something more to sort of contend with. And what happens, I think, a lot of the work I do is around kind of defenses, and the way that defenses are triggered. And systems and people are fearful of those groups. They rather than see that as just the way boys kind of are together, there's a sense that this is the wrong way to be, because actually it's impinging and encroaching on other people's kind of rules and boundaries. And I think if we could see that actually part of what's happening in those groups is like that boys are kind of seeking in a way, a sense of safety and a sense of kind of I'm all right, and actually respond in such a way as to go, well, actually, there's something here that I need to listen to as a communication, that actually I need to make it kind of safer for those boys to sort of actually, sure, if they want to meet like this, that's just part of what is, but also take steps to kind of not talk to them from here, to take steps to kind of get next to them and go, what is it? What is it that you really want to tell me? One of the experiences I wanted to share is that I often in school had to break up fights between boys. And it's a scary thing to do, but more often than not, when I did that, the boys would cry afterwards pretty quickly. So there's a lot of kind of this kind of pent up sense that actually I need to kind of do something that is boy-like. And actually, when something happened where this kind of boiled over, there was this real sort of cry for help. That actually there's something unmanageable going on, some unmanageable expectation going on that actually wasn't being listened to before that point. It was being seen as something to keep a distance from.
I mean, I remember my son, when he was very young, one of the things I noticed in him, and Luca is like, I think, like, if you were to look at it in sort of cookie cutter terms, Luca is your sort of boy in the old fashioned sense of the word. Like, if you could put him in a room with anything and he would find the only round object in the room and start kicking it around. That's just what he would do. If he, when he was a kid, where is he? He was up the tree. He has that physical. He's into that. He's just into physicality. But I did notice when he was very young that often I would feel like he was provoking me to kind of tell him off in a way. And then as soon as I'd sort of tell him off or whatever it was, that he would then cry. And what I realized very quickly, thankfully, was that was sort of his equivalent of me going into a room and listening to a sad album or film that would allow me a place where I could release or to think back on the past, to things that I've lost, and be able to touch kind of grief or sadness and be able to deal with it and get it out and have a good cry, and I realized that was his way of going, I'm feeling something, I don't know what I'm feeling, almost, can I bang up against you until you give me something to cry about, in a way, in a really strange way. And also, the other thing that came up when I was listening to you speak was I was working with a guy once who worked with gangs in South Africa. And I said to him, like, we were having a conversation about it, and I said, that must be like, that's got to be really, really frightening, And he said, it is frightening. He said, but when I look around, what I see are groups of terrified, powerless men grouping up because they're terrified, and they're terrified of each other just as much as they're terrified of everyone else. It throws up to me a bunch of really interesting questions about the education system, because my own son, he goes to a single sex comprehensive school, the local secondary school, and my whole life I'd been like, I don't want a son of mine to go to a single sex school, but one of the things that sort of switched it for me when I was talking to the headmaster was when he started talking about actually the statistics on boys doing better when they're at schools on their own. Like they seem to do better, and he was saying, we know, we sort of understand what it's like to be young men. It's our speciality. So we're better at creating kind of environments where they can flourish. And he's a new head there. He's been there about 5 years, and he seems to be doing a really, really good job with that. It had a bit of a ropey reputation that seems to be turning right round, and so all of that brings up these really interesting sort of crossroads, which I think we're hitting as a society. So we must be hitting them as an education, as an educational organizations and institutes. Is that, like, where, are we going to have single sex schools in the future? Because, gender is the gender debate is now such that it seems to be moving towards a place of complete social construction, gender being a social construction. The inevitable consequence of that is, does boyhood exist? Does boyhood and girlhood exist? If we are fluid, if we are fluid, if we're changing identities, it's all shifting, and it all seems kind of open to debate. Does that make it difficult in kind of educational systems to go, this is the best approach to use for boys and this is the best approach to use for girls? Is that a difficult conversation to have, or does it seem to be finding its way?
I think at the moment, I mean, that's another big topic, isn't it? But I think at the moment, what's the research that's around is it's still saying, well, even though there are myriad of exceptions to the rule around kind of gender, there is still kind of enough evidence to say that actually, for the most part, there is this division of the way kind of gender behaves. So, a lot of the system is predicated on that. And whatever you think about single sex education, obviously your son goes there and you're having a good time of it. My daughter went to a single sex school and she absolutely had a terrible time there until she got into sort of a mixed school where her education absolutely took off. She sort of really had a sense that she belonged in a society. The school looked like where the society within which she lived. Having said that, the other thing that I would more like to pick up on is this notion that my son, again, he's got this idea when I speak to him sometimes that he says things that make me think that underneath what he says is being a boy is wrong, being a boy is bad somehow. And I think that's much more difficult question to address, because he's got this idea that as a boy, he has the potential to do all sorts of harm. That, with that label boy comes the notion that, he's a child molester, a rapist, all of these things that make him feel like his sexuality or his gender choice, can we say, is the wrong choice. But he's not currently being presented with any kind of positive alternatives. He's got no idea of what it might be to be a good boy, not a good boy, but like,
yes,
how can we embrace this notion of the boys and boisterousness and all of those things are really positive and fantastic qualities to have. I think that's a bigger problem, because I think if we're growing boys that have got this notion that being a boy is wrong, being a boy equals wrong, then we really are in trouble. So I think, what will those boys grow into, apart from passively always waiting to be told in a way how to be and what to be next? There's no sense of taking up our identity. This is who we are and what we're doing. And I'm not sure, and I mean, that can be achieved in single sex environments, I'm sure, but I'm as keen on that being achieved in collaborative groups of both sexes, where actually it can just be accepted that these are the qualities that we need to think about in a complex way, rather than saying, we'll put the boys there and put the girls there.
Yeah, I mean, that's the sort of, I think that's the positive stuff that is coming out of where we are as a society at the moment. I mean, I think the things that sort of intersectional, an intersectional view of the world is kind of showing us, I think, in the positive side, is that it's okay to kind of explore difference. It's not that old approach to equality where, like, the way we're going to get equality is for everyone to be exactly the same, right? We're now getting down to there's some differences, and I think one of those differences that we do, I passionately believe that one of those differences that we have to embrace is that boys, boys, people who identify as boys, men, people who identify as men, as masculine, there are traits in there. There are traits in there, and otherwise you couldn't identify as it. You couldn't identify as masculine if it wasn't a trait. And those traits are not necessarily damaging. They can be great. To be full of energy, exuberant, loud, just care about getting things done, all that is fantastic as well. And how do we get to a stage where we sort of celebrate all of those differences, rather than kind of lock little bits away that maybe are not palatable, knowing that what gets locked away just comes out somewhere else. So if you have got a generation of people being told that they're bad, at some point they're going to act bad. It's not for you because it's getting locked away. It's not going to go anywhere.
I agree.
I mean, the bits that I sort of want to come down on in this conversation is there seems to be two ways that we can look at this in a way, and one is what can the sort of let's bring it down to the educational system, because that's what we're here to talk about. What can be done for the boys to make that experience the best it can be, and then actually for the teachers, what do the teachers need to be aware of, so that they can serve the boys in a way better. Or better is judgmental. That's saying that they're not being.
No, I know. Yeah, well, we know it. I think we know
to the best.
Yeah, to the best. Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that teachers need to be, in that simple exchange in a classroom, when you see boys being boisterous and talking loudly and again, we're generalizing, but because I've also taught in a girls' school, and it can be very similar masculine type behavior can take place in those environments too. But when you see boys behaving in this way, which is sort of deemed aggressive, and then teachers actually are sort of triggered by that behavior to sort of go into a sort of defensive mode, if you like. And I'm very interested in this. And a lot of the work I do is around, well, what's happening in you as the teacher when that happens in your room? What do you do next? And because there's so little training for teachers in actually looking at their own kind of responses to the way children behave, that actually a lot of it's changing now to some degree, but there's very little idea that when a child behaves in a certain way in your room that is disruptive, that actually what that child is doing is they're asking you for something. They're asking for your help. They may be telling you out of their mouths and in their behavior to get away and back off, and they don't want you, they don't need you. But we all, anybody that's been around this kind of work knows that actually what that is really saying is, look, I'm struggling here. I'm being overwhelmed with something. I'm not able to sort of step towards the unknown in the way that I know I need to. I'm surrounded by my peers. There's a possibility here that I'm going to be humiliated. There's something going on that I can't accept or face. And so what I'm going to do with that, particularly if you're a teenage boy who's 14, 15 and a big lad in a room, you can communicate in such a way to a teacher to make them afraid. So you create a fear response in your, first of all in the teachers and then within the system. Then what you get then are repressive techniques. You get teachers kind of repressing that behavior, not hearing it as a communication, and then that kid gets the idea that the way they behave, one, is bad, but two, is powerful. So they're asking for help. They don't get it. They see the fear response in those around them in the institution, in society. We see that then that child feels like, actually, this teacher can't contain me. He can't contain me. What chance have I got of containing myself? And it makes me powerful, so I can destroy this whole classroom. Together we can destroy the town. There's that phrase about the young men getting together to burn down the village just to see it burn.
I mean, I was just thinking about that in terms of sort of initiation, really, is that like up until that stage, it's kind of, you can see it running out in society, really, where young men are kind of almost going, can somebody contain me? Like, where am I going to find the situation where someone can contain me? I'm just going to act out and act out and act out until I hit those barriers. And unfortunately, what we find is it's often prison or, other sorts of, organizations are set up to put arms around, rather than a nurturing way of kind of going, because it is safety, isn't it? It's really hard to see when you see a group of young men acting out, but really they're going, how do I find safety here? Because I don't feel very safe right now.
Yeah, that's right. And when that's in a classroom, I mean, the other thing to remember about classrooms is that the whole system is kind of set up to, in a way, has been set up to keep pupils passive. The passive pupil who sits and listens and puts their hand up, answers the questions, and is academically successful, is the successful young student. Whereas like a young boy in a room who may not, it doesn't have to be a boy, but a young person in a room who isn't kind of configured to sit quietly and, put their hand up and follow the logic of a lesson through, and then acts out and tells you that they're not able to do that, well, that person then is labeled, actually, you're wrong. You're wrong in the system. It's not that the system has to rethink itself, which it needs to do. It just labels that person doesn't fit. So that's difficult when boys particularly come up against this notion that the way they behave is wrong and bad, because it doesn't fit this kind of academic model of the way the system is sort of set up to, in a way, to create loads of university professors. That's the way the education system has been built. That actually the good person is the clever person who can do the quiet book passive learning. But actually that's an unreal and uncomplex model. It's a Victorian idea. And that still runs through the system, and that has to evolve. And I think it is evolving. But along the way, lots of boys, particularly poor white boys, are being marginalized and actually given very little hope of what comes next for them, because their abilities and their economic background and all of the things that may prohibit them from learning, the system can't kind of configure around them to make it work, and so they're just sort of marginalized. So it's it's a tough one. I think the system is trying to learn, but it is about helping teachers first and foremost not be so fearful of what is just naturally a child asking for help in the room. I think that's, for me, that's the beginning of it, really.
And it seems like a sort of a problem that does sort of desperately need to be solved in a way, because you can take that model of boys and you can take that out to kind of toxic masculinity, whatever that means. You can take that out and go, well, it's just a replay of that. It's just a replay of what I've learned is I am quite big and powerful, and I can shout and be big and aggress until I get my needs met in one way or another, and it's really just a continuation of that story of you're dangerous. We think you're dangerous, and of course that power, like we said before, is intoxicating. I certainly found it intoxicating myself as soon as I realized how people responded to my aggression. As soon as I realized, hang on, when I get in someone's face and I'm aggressive to them, I often will not get what I want in one way or another.
Yeah.
When I was a young man, it was like a light bulb moment. It was like, I can do what I like now. I can get what I want, and until you realize actually the only person that ends up damaging not the only person, it damages everyone around me and me. Because I never learned to take care of my own needs, and I never learned to ask for what I want, and I never learned to cooperate in a way when I have that model.
But the other thing around what you were doing is, I would guess, is you were asking for what you wanted, but you got something different.
Yeah.
You were trying to say, oh, what the fuck can I do with all of this stuff, But actually, and you only probably ever met grown-ups who kind of backed off.
Yeah.
Whereas, it would have been good at some point. And it sounds like you did meet somebody who goes, well, actually, or you found, you found what you needed to, you found the answer to the question you kept asking in a different way. But if we could answer those questions earlier, it would be much better.
And it comes back to, in a way, I guess it does come down to back to ideas, lost ideas of initiation, really, in a way of healthy initiation, in the sort of idea of, the men will come and take the boys because the men know how to contain them, and the boys would suddenly find themselves in an environment where it was like, oh, hang on, this can't work for me. I can't just aggress my way through this. I can't just shout louder because there's people around me who can shout louder and hold me even harder than I possibly think I can, and more powerful than me on a physical, vocal level, and are going to hold me. Yeah. So I've got to find a different solution to the problem. This ain't going to work. Yeah. And I guess it's that sort of, that must be quite difficult for schools and teachers, because in a way you're being put into a sort of initiatory position in a way, like you've got you're responsible for the children, and kind of in their, especially secondary school education, you're kind of responsible for children going from being children to adults, and that's an initiatory time in their life.
No, I think that's right. I think the difficulty is around understanding this idea of boundaries. I think what initiation is all about is like providing a container, isn't it? It's a container. It's a space where there is a boundary beyond which you will not go. We'll find the place where you need to be held. That's what the container is. And I think one of the big things in education is like a misunderstanding, even though it's there intellectually, but there's a misunderstanding of what the boundaries are for. The boundary in a classroom is there to help the student learn. It's not to help the school lay down its rules. Behavior management is not a tool for school policy to make sure that the school is well run. Behavior management is a way of containing the classrooms enough so that the children feel safe, so that they will be able to learn. So there's a real difficulty in the way that teachers approach behavior management, because they often don't see it as, look, clear boundaries are not so that you can feel like you're in charge of the class. Clear boundaries are there so that child can feel like it's safe in that room and they can trust themselves to open up, be vulnerable and learn. That's what the boundaries are there for. And the moment you understand that, it just changes everything, because a kid can do whatever they like in that room. They can call you all sorts of names, and be clear, I've been called all sorts of names in classrooms, and what you get in your mind, you can do whatever you like to me in here, but I am here to hold and keep you in a position where you are able to kind of let your guard down and learn. And if you just as consistent with that, the results you get are fantastic. But it's just looking at the same thing from a different angle. It's a slight shift, but it's an enormous shift in perspective.
That we need. I imagine it is, because I think on my own journey of being a father, that same lesson was difficult for me to learn. But when I got it, it was a real sort of aha moment here, when I realized, like, my son is not pushing against my boundaries to annoy me. He's not pushing against them to annoy me. He's trying to see where the edge of his safety is. He's constantly pushing out, to go, at what stage, where am I being held here? Am I safe? Am I safe to run around? I'm running around this far, this far. Can I go this far out and I'm still held? Can I go this far out and I'm still held? where's the and it's like parenthood, I guess, in a way, is a container, isn't it? It's like you're creating
definitely.
a container around these young people who are experimenting with what life means and finding their way, and they want to know there's arms around them, even though they would, if you asked them, they'd go, no, I will do absolutely everything I want and when I want, and eat chips all day and all that. But they don't really. They want to know that you're loving and caring for them and holding them.
Exactly.
And I guess that's just saying that, like, a school really is the natural extension of that. Really.
It is. A school is. I mean, we know we learn how to behave in family systems, and then we go to school, and then we imprint those kind of learned behaviours onto systems that we encounter from then on. So you walk into a classroom, you've got an adult at the front, you've got peers next to you, and actually, to a large extent, you've got a parent at the front, and you've got siblings sitting next to you, and it's depending on what your experience of that system has been before you entered that room, you will bring that with you. So, you know, that leads to all, for the most part, that's great, because most people have got backgrounds that are very stable and all of that. But if you meet students who don't have that, they will bring that with them as well. So if you are not training teachers, particularly with boys, because boys often can cause more physical damage, if you're not kind of bringing that insight into teachers' education and training, and really helping them to understand that you are the containing energy in this room. And that's what these students want from you, particularly these big lads at the back, you know, more than anyone, because they feel like they've got all this strength and power, and what are they going to do with it? If you can't help them contain it, where are they going to put it? Because they are going to put it somewhere.
So, I mean, going on from that, if people are watching this who find themselves in, you know, not just a teaching position, but, you know, what I really, really love about what you do is that you seem to create a distinction between, or rather you blur the distinction between teachers and leaders, which I think is really a really interesting way of looking at it. It's going, you're not here to teach these children specifically. You're here to kind of lead their learning. And as we know, kind of leadership brings its challenges with it, and part of that is making sure this container is okay. That's kind of being built here, you know, what's the thing that needs to happen here, rather than just, I'm going to get you to know this stuff. How do I lead it to make sure that this works for everyone who's here? So people who find themselves in a teaching position with children, or in a leadership role around young men, what's your sort of tips for them?
I think the first, it's interesting, because I'm often asked, you know, there's a thing now, isn't there? Tricks and tips. You know, what are your tricks and tips? Just that you could come up with a list of 5 tips.
Get a different job.
Yeah. But I suppose the big thing is always just be really clear on the objective. What's the task? What are you there to do, first of all? And is everyone really clear about what you're there to do? So in a classroom, you're always there at the service of the learning. That's what you're there to do. So what are you trying to achieve? And how invested are the people that you are leading in that task? And do they know its importance? Do they know its, where it's going, the aim of it, and what they're going to get from kind of taking part in that? Because the drive is always, there's a strange drive in us, I think, to connect, and secondly, to kind of act together towards a purpose. It's something that we are driven to do. We want to do that, and in a way, as kind of teachers, and maybe as leaders, is just to kind of allow that to take place by being clear about your objectives and being clear about your boundaries. What is and isn't acceptable, what is and isn't acceptable within this kind of task and the way we approach it, and also how can we kind of engage the talents of everybody who is in the room in such a way as to kind of make this happen. That's what good teachers do.
And I really the bit that sort of struck with me was that distance thing, you know, that kind of kind of getting closer in a way. What I made up around that, as you were saying, like back here isn't gonna work, because what you're saying to the boys is I'm somehow keeping you at arm's length because there's something going on here that I don't feel safe around. So maybe it's about also just getting closer to them.
Thank you. Absolutely right. And one of the things that we do on the course I teach is, for a long time when I first started teaching, was I would teach from the front, often from behind a desk, because actually that kept me safe. And the moment I realized actually what these children really want, and what is difficult to do and feels counterintuitive to do, is to actually step into the zone that feels dangerous, move towards the problem rather than move away from it. The moment you move towards a problem and you move towards the children who, the boys, if you like, who are feeling like they're throwing this stuff, the moment you move into their space in a way that says, I've come to help, actually everything changes and you can feel the shift. So, yeah.
I've heard you speak before about the sort of moment of when this realization kind of came. And I think it was something that I think it's something that if you're willing to, people watching this would really like to hear.
Well, it came to me through failure, as all good lessons do. It came to me through a lesson I was teaching very early on, nearly 20 years ago now, when I kept going into classrooms trying to take charge of them, take control of everything that happened in the room. And I would plan meticulously every moment so that there would be no moment that wasn't under my control. And I kept trying to do that and actually failing miserably. And there was one November afternoon when I did that in a class in a school in Enfield, North London. And, I walked in, and within like 5 minutes of me trying to control this class, the class had just descended into absolute chaos. There are kids throwing books there. It was just the worst. And I gave up. I don't know if this is what happened. I just thought, actually, you know what? I've had enough. And my intention in that moment was to go and see the principal at the end of the lesson, go to my car and go home. And I think I was 10 minutes into a 50-minute lesson. So I had 40 minutes to go, and the classroom was in chaos. And I thought, well, I'm just going to sit down. I sat down at the front and I gave up. And weirdly, what happened next was the thing that changed everything. Within about 5 minutes, the chaos in that room had actually all calmed down. All of the kids were like, well, what's he doing? They saw that I'd given up, but actually my expectation was it was going to get worse somehow, but it didn't get worse. What happened is everybody calmed down, and the children in that room started to kind of gather together in groups. They started talking about what they'd seen on telly last night. They started talking about the local football team. They started talking about maths homework that they were going to do, or art homework that was due. And the thing that changed everything for me was after about 10, 15 minutes, I thought, well, these kids are learning. They're learning from each other. And what is it that I bring into this room that puts a barrier between me and them? And it was an amazing moment. One of the kids, after about 20 minutes, said, "You okay, sir?" And this was someone about 15 minutes ago who was actually laughing in my face. They said, "Are you all right? Do you want me to go and get somebody for you?" And I said, "Oh, well, no, I'm fine." They said, "Oh, don't worry, sir. Teaching isn't for everybody." It just totally shifted. And what the thing I got in that moment was, what I was coming in with was a desire to control. And what I was trying to control was my own fear. That's what I was trying to control. And what was really I got in that moment was...
Sorry, go on. Someone just sent a message, and I've looked at it, and the sound came on.
The job for me was to go into that space, understanding what I was bringing. So dealing with my own sense of fear before I went in, and two, accepting that those children had a natural tendency to learn, and it was my job actually to be a guide. That's what my role was, and to create an environment where they would learn. So that changed everything.
That kind of, there was a question that which just came in from Richard Topham. And it's around that. So I think now's a good time to kind of ask it, which is, do teachers need to have done some self-reflection work to clear their triggers during their training so that they can respond rather than react?
Yes, Richard. Very simple. Yes, they do. And it's interesting because there isn't much room for reflection, even though teachers are taught to be reflective practitioners. They're only ever reflecting in a way on the kind of intellectual process, and they're not reflecting on the personal process that teaching really is. Everyone knows that teaching is about creating relationships. Every single teacher knows that, as has every pupil. And yet there is no training really about what does that mean? How do I do that? And how can I reflect on the way I come into a room and my own kind of personal triggers, so that actually I'm aware of them. And that's not the work of an hour. It might be the work of a course like mine, but it's also the work of helping teachers be personally reflective people.
Okay. So I think that brings us to the end of this conversation. We've already been talking for nearly an hour, which is actually very little for me and you. But it's made more sense than it usually does when we talk for more than an hour. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it up there. But I wrap up every time by asking the same 4 questions, okay, to everyone. So I'm going to ask you these same 4 questions now.
Okay.
So the first one is, what was the question that I didn't ask that you wish I had?
How come you're so good looking?
About you or me?
Yeah, me.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, that's genetics.
Sorry, I don't know. It's a difficult one. What question?
And it might be that I'm so good at this that there isn't one.
I think you're so good at this that there isn't one.
Thank you for agreeing. That's what I think too. I'll put that down.
Yeah, put that down.
I'm going to put that on my CV. Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Please.
So the second question is, what lesson? So let me start again. So if you could go back in time and meet yourself as a teenager, what piece of advice would you give yourself, knowing that you probably wouldn't listen?
Not sure what piece of advice I'd give myself. I think I might give myself more permission to explore who I was. I think, just more permission to make mistakes. I think I was either part of a generation or what I brought with me to school wasn't right or acceptable to make mistakes, but mistakes were something to be pushed aside. And I think I would have encouraged myself to make more mistakes and to fail more. And for that to be okay.
That's a very the answers I get to that are usually kind of around that thing. It's either something around you're enough or just it's okay to make mistakes, just kind of experiment a bit and work it all out. You don't have to know all the answers.
Yeah.
Where can people get in contact with you, keep up to date with what you're doing?
They can access my website. That's the easiest place, which is www.amindtoteach, which is all one word, .com, a mind to teach. That's where I keep my thoughts, ideas. I've got blog posts on there, and you can access the course and access my email on that. So mindtoteach.com.
Okay, brilliant. And we'll make sure that goes in all of the comments, etc. Around this. So wherever you're watching it, have a little search and you'll find all of that information. So the final question then, what book has had the most impact on your life?
What book has had the most impact on my life? Wow, that's an enormous question. I don't know what I mean. There's so many books. I mean, I'm an English teacher, so I've read so many books that have had an influence on children's lives who've read them. But I suppose in this context of what I'm talking about, there's a brilliant book by a woman called Biddy Ewell, which is called Learning Teaching Relationships, which is all around the psychology of kind of this approach to classroom management. And if you're interested at all in this work and this way of looking at things, that's a great book. And there's another one called Emotional Aspects of Learning and Teaching. And if I was in charge of learning and teaching worldwide, everybody would be forced to read it and do tests on it. So,
well, I'm sure you will be one day. And
I haven't got long left. I hope so.
All right, Steve. I mean, thank you for all the information on a personal level. Really great to connect with you, as it always is. Everyone watching at home, thank you. Thank you to Steve. Thank you for watching. This is Thursday for Knowledge, and we do these live every Thursday at 3:30 p.m. inside the Magnificent Man Project group. If you are watching this on YouTube, why not go and join that group, and then you can ask questions directly, or at least subscribe and click the bell for notifications. I'm Laurence Johns. This was Thursday for Knowledge, and I look forward to seeing you, Steve Carr, very soon, and everyone watching. I hope I get to meet you one day. All right, take care.